So I'm going to talk about how federated charities can strengthen their support for trustees and boards, which is some research undertaken by me, Penny Wilson, for Eastside People. Now, just people who are listening live, please think about a couple of questions that we're going to throw at you in the breakout rooms. And the questions include, do you recognise the report's insights in your federation, and are the recommendations sensible? Now, I think it's useful at this point to say that I'm not a federation expert. In my work, I work with thousands upon thousands of trustees, aspiring trustees, and people who work with trustees each year. And I work right across different causes, locations and sizes. So it'd be really interesting to hear your reflections from federations. So the aim of the research was to look at how federations currently support the governance across the federation and the trustees within local charities, and the barriers and enablers to further trustee support. We did 11 structured interviews with 14 contacts, and it's really important to say that these were mostly with people from the national charity, and this probably really skewed actually what we heard, and it'd be interesting to hear from people here from local charities about what they think about the findings. And people in the national charity held a real range of roles. Now, as you know, federations vary really considerably, and we interviewed federations with just a few charities in the network to federations with hundreds of charities in the network, with a massive range of sizes of charities and of geographies. But between them here, the federations that we interviewed had 1,300 charities and nearly 9,500 trustees. So here were some of our insights. And some of them are quite unsurprising, I should say. So insight number one, governance is universally seen as critically important. This probably isn't surprising. What did actually really surprise and slightly delight me was the real passion that people had when they spoke about the importance of governance. They felt that actually it was really critical to the federation having its impact, doing the thing it was set up to do. Second insight was that governance challenges were really similar across federations. And again, this probably isn't that surprising, and the challenges really reflect the wider charity sector. So, for example, financial strain, CEO burnout, and tension and conflict both between trustees and between trustees and staff. Insight three is that the differences within federations can make standardised governance support difficult. Again, probably not that surprising as an insight. And I found that federations were really acutely aware of size and context differences and tried to tailor any support accordingly. Insight four, there were many more similarities than differences in how governance was supported. And I found four common types of governance support. There are others, but the four that I'll mention are crisis support, quality assurance, bespoke support, one-to-one support for individual local charities for governance developments, and the provision of templates and written guidance. And of course, local charities can and do make their own arrangements for support. Insight five, crisis support and quality assurance are the two most common forms of governance support by federations. And I'll just say a little bit more about quality assurance because we're probably going to, crisis came up quite a lot, so it runs throughout the other sections. So there was a huge spectrum of quality assurance arrangements, from loose self-assessment against external frameworks to bespoke frameworks against which charities are assessed by a national team, and everything in between. And there were real concerns about quality assurance. There were concerns about the burden on local charities and on the national charity. And there was a particular concern about smaller charities having to go through the same thing as much larger charities. And some federations we found are actively reviewing their quality assurance frameworks. Insight six, governance support isn't as proactive as some federations might like it to be. And in particular, not enough proactive development and networking of trustees, and federations our interviewees talked about how they would like to see more of that, and perhaps more trustee-driven approaches to shared opportunities or challenges. And insight seven, there's a huge tension for the national charity between being a supportive partner, a friend on the one hand, and an assessor of governance on the other. And that tension was very much alive and well. So here are five of the main barriers that I came across in terms in barriers to further trustee and governance support. First of all, a narrow conduit to trustees through CEOs and chairs. The biggest practical barrier cited was that federations don't have a list. They don't have a contact list for all of the trustees across the local charities in their federation. Most federations rely on chairs and CEOs passing information on to trustees. And although several interviewees said that they would like to communicate directly with trustees, one or two noted that it might not be appropriate, that it might not be seen as appropriate, or that it might not be their job. It might not be appropriate. The second barrier was low trustee take up. And it's worth saying here that there's quite a lot of proactive support for chairs. And my sense was that this is actually really well received and well supported, and often driven by the national chair putting a huge amount of effort in, and or some local charity chairs really driving this and really putting blood, sweat and tears into making this thrive. However, there were relatively few examples of this kind of bespoke development and networking opportunities for individual trustees who aren't chairs. And we've just seen that trustees are difficult to contact, so that might account for some of the take up. But also, support didn't appear really to be co-designed with trustees. And I'll just hold the Festival of Trusteeship up here as an example of what can be done. We had 1,600 people, 1,600 trustees in November 2025. So it's possible to engage trustees at scale. The next barrier, a rather unsurprising barrier, was funding and capacity. We had several examples of former trustee support programmes which had been stopped due to resource constraints, probably not helped by low trustee take up. And we also had people talking about resources, particularly templates and guidance, which were really hard to keep up to date. Expertise was another barrier. Now, the people that we interviewed were clearly unbelievably knowledgeable about governance. That was quite clear. But individuals are necessarily either governance generalists or specialists in some things and not others. It is impossible to be a specialist in every single aspect of things that crop up governance-wise. And then the final barrier, which I've really inelegantly called politics, is that not all interviewees felt it was their role to provide trustee support, and some would like to do it, but weren't certain that local charities would want it, that it would be welcomed. And it might indeed be that the national charity isn't the best home for some sorts of governance support. Local charities might rather get it from elsewhere. So how do federations want to improve governance support? These were the 6 things that came up most commonly. Not all federations want all of these, but these were the 6 things that came up repeatedly. Number 1, more trustee-specific learning and networking. And interviewees talked about benefits including better understanding of the trustee role, keeping up to date with the cause, keeping up to date with legal developments, developing skills like finance, and sharing practical solutions and innovations between boards. Secondly, interviewees talked about wanting better data on trustees. So federations do collect governance data through the assurance process and sometimes through wider network surveys, but interviewees felt that that was limited. And several said that they would like to hold better data on trustees. That might include trustee demographics, and that they'd also like to spend more time analysing common governance challenges, so analysing those challenges more strategically. Thirdly, federations said that they would like more co-production of trustee support, co-production with trustees. And there were some reflections from interviewees that they hadn't really deeply researched what the trustees across the federation need or what might help them to have more of an impact. Number 4, interviewees talked about wanting more support for trustee recruitment, but this was really, really nuanced. So almost every interviewee referenced trustee recruitment difficulties, but few offered trustee recruitment support beyond signposting and templates. 1 or 2 did offer more intensive trustee recruitment support, sometimes in-house, sometimes commissioned. But although interviewees talked about the challenges, they talked about why help might be useful, they didn't necessarily see it as their role to provide it. They were concerned that they didn't have the resources for the scale of the challenge. And sometimes they didn't really know where to start, and perhaps the scale of the challenge was a little bit overwhelming. The next thing was access to external capacity or expertise. And again, this was quite nuanced. There was a really wide range of practice and opinions in terms of using or not using external expertise for governance support. Many federations have trusted associates or partners that they can call on, either where they need more capacity or they need particular specialist expertise. And some said they were reviewing that and they were looking for extra or different expertise, particularly for crunch points and particularly for particular specialisms like merger. And sometimes it was felt that independent support could be useful, particularly around conflict, for mediation for conflict and merger. And then finally, future proofing federations. So several interviewees spoke about needing to focus more on the longer term vision and about how the boards within the federation could work more together on that. And there was quite a lot of conversations about this latent opportunity to use this vast amount of talent out in local boards who could help across the federation. And that's tricky. And I'm going to talk more about that when I come on to that recommendation. So final slide, 8 recommendations to federations. Recommendation 1, build direct trustee communication channels. Without solving this, everything else is hampered. Stronger governance support is hampered. However, I think it's really important to say that this isn't about the national charity broadcasting. This isn't the purpose of this being able to communicate with all trustees. It's more than broadcasting. This is about engagement. This is about a trustee in Kent learning about what's happening on a board in Bradford, for example. Recommendation 2 is to map governance trends and challenges. Mapping would enable federations to identify shared approaches to prevent challenges, to promote good governance and to support innovation. Recommendation 3, research the needs of trustees with the aim of reviewing and developing support programmes. Federations should systematically ask trustees what support they need, what has stopped them engaging in the past, and what would help them to be more effective. And at the moment, it seems to me, and please feel free to disagree, that trustee support is more often designed based on assumptions or based on feedback from a relatively small number of engaged individuals. Recommendation 4, review the balance of reactivity and proactivity in your governance support offer. Significant time is spent on crises. And while this is absolutely essential, federations should periodically review whether sufficient resource is being invested in proactive activities like trustee development and peer learning. Recommendation 5, develop trustee learning and networking programmes. So opportunities for trustees to invest in their own development, to network with others. And again, noting that the national charity is the enabler, it's not the holder of all of the answers. Recommendation 6, improve trustee succession pipelines, including collecting better data on trustee attributes, for example, demographics, tenure, skills, expertise, and lived experience. And improved data can support more strategic approaches to succession, to board diversity, and to the development of future trustees right across the federation. Recommendation 7, a thorny one, use trustee expertise as a resource for the whole federation. Federations have significant expertise within their local trustee bodies, but limited visibility of what that expertise is and where it sits. Federations should map trustee skills, create expert pools, and use trustees as mentors to other trustees, as well as contributors to federation-wide strategy. Now, this has to be optional, doesn't it? Trustees are volunteers. This is for trustees who have the time and the inclination to contribute at a national level, and it mustn't take them away from their local responsibilities. And final recommendation, recommendation 8, is to build stronger shared learning between governance support colleagues across federations, to bring federations together to talk about trustee development, to talk about what works, what doesn't work, what platforms are working, what messages are working, what research has found. So there's absolutely no doubt that a federated structure enables charities to have a higher level of effective governance than average in the charity sector. I see that in my own trustee training. However, I think there's real opportunity to go further. I'd love to know if you agree. And I hope that I've given you some challenge and thought on this area. So I'm going to stop there and turn the recording off.